Welcome back to the Token Intelligence Show. AI is changing the way we work, and here on the show, John and I try to show you the state of the art, cut through all the noise, and hopefully help you become a leader by acting with wisdom in this new era that we live in. So today we are going to talk about two subjects that are near and dear to both of our hearts, and those are craftsmanship and burnout. And we're going to start out actually with a post that I found on X that really caught my eye because it comes from a very senior engineer at a very reputable company. And I'm just going to read it to start out.
Let's do it.
So this is Dylan Mulroy, and we'll link to it in the show notes. He says, "Y'all, I'm not going to lie. It's way harder to get joy and satisfaction out of building with AI than it was before. Constantly straddling burnout, being far less immersed in hard problems, constant context switching. I'm tired of the uncertainty of where this is going and how to do it well." This struck me because the way that it's written, you can sense his frustration, right? It almost like he crafted it, at the end of a long day, in a moment of weakness.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting framing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna lie. I had to Google NGL. I read it a couple times and I was like, what is NGL again?
Not gonna lie.
Yeah. Maybe I need to spend more time. No, more time. To spend more time on X.
I don't know if you need to spend more time on X. I spend plenty of time on it for work. But tell me about, first of all, do you think that this is becoming more common? This burnout, or people who are very, very heavy users of AI stepping back and saying, I don't really know if I like this.
Yeah, I think so. I just have this visual. I think in visuals sometimes. And I'm imagining, you're a car guy, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm imagining, think about if you had to drive 20 minutes in an old car that really pulled right. Mm-hmm. Kind of annoying.
Totally.
Think about if you're a semi driver in a semi and you had to drive all day in a semi that pulled right.
Yeah.
That's my visual for driving AI.
Yeah.
Where it's constantly pulling, sometimes left, sometimes right.
Yeah.
And you're constantly pulling it back in the right direction for the thing you want it to do. And I think there's something extreme, if you're using AI that way, there's something really draining about that.
Okay, great. I have a great story to end on that's a great analogy about that.
Perfect.
An actual experience like this.
I figured, yeah.
From a real car.
Yeah.
So let's zoom out first, though, because we want to speak to a couple people here. First, we want to speak to people like you and I who use AI very heavily all day long and who may empathize with the sentiment that Dylan expressed in his X post, right?
Yep.
Like I'm in this, I'm using it, I'm an advanced user, and I have questions, right? I don't know if I like this type of work more than my previous, mode of work. And then I think there are also a lot of people who have not hit that point yet, and maybe are even in the honeymoon phase of, holy cow, this is amazing, this is going to transform everything, this is so helpful. And then there's probably people who have used it and maybe they haven't quite seen the power yet. And so I think I'd love to speak to both of those people because you and I have been sort of on the edge of where Dylan is.
Right.
But then also I think that people will increasingly experience this as they get deeper and deeper into AI.
Yeah.
So before we speak to those two types of listeners, I'd like to zoom out and talk about first principles in terms of craftsmanship and tools. This is actually a topic that goes way, way back to our very first episode.
That's right.
About 6 months ago.
Yep.
Almost exactly 6 months ago, actually, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And it's a topic of craftsmanship, right? And so not seeking, career advancement or political advancement in whatever your profession is, but just focusing on being a craftsman.
Right.
And that is intrinsically rewarding and results in, inadvertently joining a community of other people who share the same value of becoming a craftsman.
Right.
And we've talked on the show about how ultimately that is sort of the most durable form of career advancement, is just becoming very, very good at what you do.
Right.
And you'll naturally progress in your career. But what's interesting, I think about Dylan, who is an extremely accomplished software engineer, senior level, works on really difficult stuff, and is a craftsman, right? And what's interesting is that he's using a completely new tool set now to do his job, right? Like dramatically different than even just a couple of years ago. And so the way that the job is done has changed. And so I wanted to ask you, what is explain craftsmanship through that lens of the tools dramatically changing the way that something is done.
Yeah, so specifically, I think for a senior engineer, like in this case, the tools have shifted really dramatically, but maybe even bigger than that. Let's say that this individual wanted to work for another company. Like even the typical process of you would do like a leak code interview, for example. Like there's a lot of questions around that, like which components of that are valuable versus not. So there's kind of this, it's not just a day-to-day thing. There's also like an identity thing here where like I've worked for these companies and I got to work for these companies because I could prove that I could solve these hard problems.
Right.
I'm not sure my value when at least a growing subset of the hard problems somebody AI can solve as far as think through and apply in the individual, circumstance. So I think that's probably the core of it for a lot of people, because you're working in a different way. Yes. But you had a bit of identity wrapped in, like, I understand this hard problem. I know how to solve it. I can flex it for different companies.
Yep.
And there's still value in there. Like the thinking part that got you to be able to learn how to do, like, there's still value there.
Yep.
But measuring the value actually just got a lot harder. Like if you gave me a room full of engineers and we kind of had a standard, and I say we, at least like the Metas and Googles and companies like that of the world kind of had this standard of how you get these jobs and what things you need to know and all the things. And that's a little bit broken right now. And I think it's affecting people's identities a bit in that space. Identities in that, like, am I any good at this? Right?
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think that if I think about craftsmanship, I agree that there is I think about it as a joy in going through the difficult process of crafting something great, of making something great. To your point, standards, right? And the measurement for standards has changed in software engineering. But tool sets have changed historically as well, right?
Yeah.
So there's a great example. I asked a guy, an older software engineer. Actually, I was at church and we just, the service ended and, you just meet people who you've seen before, but maybe you haven't talked to. And we happened to be sitting very close and we started chatting. He asked what I did. I said, I work at Vercel. He was like, oh, I'm in software engineering. I'm familiar with Vercel, et cetera. And he's probably 15 or 20 years older than me.
Okay. Wow.
And has been a programmer for a very, very long time.
Right.
And so I was very interested in his perspective. I was like, a vast majority of your career has been experienced without AI. Do you use AI in software engineering, et cetera? And he just had a very simple answer, which I love. I love sort of what I call like old man wisdom.
Okay.
He said, yeah, I mean, for software engineers, it's kind of like a carpenter. When the electric circular saw came out, like you could theoretically choose to do your job without it, but no one's going to compete in the marketplace if you're not using this really powerful tool to do part of your job, right? And it's not like the other previous tools become completely irrelevant, but there's just sort of a new primary way of doing certain things that before were very repetitive, and the whole process speeds up and can become more precise, and the analogy breaks down at some point with a circular saw.
Right.
But I thought that was really interesting because the I think we can over rotate on the joy of using the tools,
Right.
and of letting go of a lot of investment put into getting really good at using a handsaw or a planer, or other things like that. And you put and that is, for a craftsman, part of it is like, I mean, people like tools, that could be digital, it could be physical.
And it's not just that. I mean, as a craftsman, people fall in love with some really minute details about tools.
Yes.
Like, I love this tool because of how it's weighted, like where the balance point is hit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they get into the steel it was made. People get really deep.
Oh, absolutely.
And when you completely upend like all the tools they used to use, like, I think it's pretty disconcerting.
It's disconcerting for sure. And I think that there's part of that that's worth lamenting.
Right.
Because tools are great. There's another example. I like to work on cars. I like to work on mountain bikes. And there's this tool company that makes tools for working on bicycles. And
you told me about this before. I think.
Abby, yes.
Yeah.
Abby Bike Tools. And it's such a great company. Their tagline is "Precision is our religion." It's Abbey, so they have like a monk. Precision is our religion.
Okay.
And they don't really. They just make the best tool possible, and it costs whatever it costs for them to get their margin.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, some of these things are like outrageously expensive, but they literally don't care. And so I remember one year, my grandfather gave me a little cash, for Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided I was going to spend $150 on this like pretty basic Allen tool.
Set or
no, it's like
just
one tool with like a couple of bits,
nice. Yeah.
But you mentioned weight, and that was immediately the first thing that I noticed is like it had a very opinionated weight of the tool and then like balance, and so like it just felt so different to use it, to tighten and like the precision level and everything. And it's a heavy tool, like intentionally by design.
Right.
And so if I think about, I love using that tool, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's almost like, having a couple tools like that. It's like, okay, if you have a chance to like do something on your bike or fix something, it's like great because you get to use the tool.
Yeah.
And so I think it's legitimate to lament like not using these tools, right? Because the people who created those tools themselves are craftsmen, and there's just sort of an ethos around that, right? And when I think about, so there's one side of that, right? But then the other side is, well, really, like, tools are a means to an end.
Yep.
You're trying to do something. You're trying to build something. You're trying to fix something, right? And that's sort of ultimately what it means to be a craftsman. But I absolutely think that there is, and I think a great analogy is actually weight, like using AI to write code, to write, actual words or copy or prose or other things like that. It makes like the physical experience lighter. It's not like holding a heavy tool. It's actually like, there's less like tactile sensation.
Yep.
And I think that's a hard adjustment, and for good reasons.
Right.
For good reasons. So let's talk to Dylan, actually. He's probably way more equipped to to speak on this subject than us and give us advice. Yeah. But let's try to give Dylan advice, because it seems like he's feeling a lot of those things that we talked about, right? The craftsmanship, the tool set changing, and some of the joy that he previously experienced, sort of slipping away. So what would you say to Dylan if he were here with us?
So I actually would say I've experienced all these same things, but it happened about 10 years ago. It was when I first became a manager. It's so similar. It's so
that's
similar.
A great analogy.
Because you're delegating work at that time to another person who might not have a full understanding of the context that you understand, might not have a full like mastery of the same tools that you have. And there's such a sharp analogy there. And I think especially for engineers that are at this place right now where they're having to delegate work to this other entity, that it's really hard to get your mind around exactly what does it understand right now, what does it need to understand, all the things. It's so similar to that.
Yeah, super interesting. What have you experienced this burnout like Dylan has experienced? I mean, he seems to sort of be in a place where he's at least at a minimum had a bad day, but you know, is maybe sort of thinking about, wow, I mean, like what does this mean for me as an engineer?
Yeah, I think yes and no. One, in some ways I feel a bit prepared for it because of the management piece. Of like, oh, this is, it's a lot like managing people.
Yep.
But it's like managing a new person where you don't for whatever reason, maybe you inherited them from another team. You don't know their capabilities. You don't know what context they have. And unfortunately, it diverges because it's not a human. And and nobody knows exactly like the right way. To do it. And then they go through this random training that you don't have any insight to, and then they pop up again, and you're like, okay, you seem a little different. It's like you have this employee that goes on this retreat like a couple times a quarter, and they come back different, and you're like, how exactly are they different? Like, that's the weird part.
That's so true. That's so true.
That's the really
leadership training.
But back to the advice thing, or to answer your question first, I guess, like, yes. And that, like, I spend a ton of hours, like, how do I do this stuff now? Right. Because I feel like I have to understand how to do it to set expectations for other people. And, it's just good to know how to do it anyways, because there's ways that I can be productive in situations I wouldn't have been able to before, because I can more quickly compile context and then more quickly add value. Whereas before I'd be like, well, like, it's just going to take too long for me to add value.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's that. And figuring out the balance there is really exhausting. There's a bit of burnout of like, I definitely wouldn't have jumped in before. Like, but I think I think I could. And then not measuring hard time, but also like switching cost as part of that like mental equation of like, should I jump in and switch and task switch to try to add some value here? Like, what's the trade-off? Then that's exhausting to figure out what the right answer is. Right now.
Totally agree. I totally agree. I think that it was interesting. One of the things that Dylan mentioned in his X post was that there's less time spent immersed in hard problems.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. And the experience of that is that you're having conversations about hard problems with a machine, but you're not necessarily, it's not a singular experience of immersing yourself in the problem, going into the valley and sort of emerging on the other side, with a solution, which is a very, very different type of experience.
I think there's one other factor here too. And I think this is a person-to-person thing. If you are an internal processor versus an external processor, if you're more of an internal processor, which, maybe Dylan is, I think it's a harder tax on you. Because if you're already a little bit of an external processor, you get a bit rewarded working with AI because you and I've talked about, you can talk to it for several minutes and like brain dump like a lot of useful context, or maybe for you it just flows more easily to like type out a paragraph. But if you're more of an internal processor, I think, I think that might be hard. It might be harder for those people.
The last point that I'll make that I've seen contribute to this sort of burnout or questioning of whether you like this new way of working with AI is that the tool set changes very often. So before we talked about the tools fundamentally changing, right? So what does craftsmanship mean when the tool set changes, right? It's still the same thing because you're using these tools to produce something great. The tools change, but if you think about the circular saw, my dad has a circular saw still that he got from his dad. So this thing is old. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
at this point, it's, you know, got to be like 60 years old, and it works great.
That's awesome.
And when I compare it to the circular saw that I have, they're not that different
Sure.
fundamentally, right?
And the economics are interesting, right? Like how much was a circular saw of that quality 6
Totally.
years ago
Yeah,
versus today, right?
But the difference, and the reason I bring that analogy up is, you know, there, of course, have been new tools invented for carpentry, but the circular saw is still a primary tool and it hasn't changed in, you know, half a century. But one of the tricky things with AI is that not only have the tools fundamentally changed, but there's rapid shift within that change once you sort of get to the other side, right? And so just a couple examples of this. New models come out all the time. Is it going to be better to switch? You know, if you have a workflow built up around a certain model, do you switch, right? Does it make sense to switch, right? There are all sorts of fundamental, like not fundamental, but there are all sorts of ways that you can change the fundamental behavior of the model that you're using. So you can have skills, you can have system prompts, there are plugins, right? And so that sort of re-baselines the model and gives it more specific capabilities in certain contexts, et cetera. You know, there's actually still this concept of prompt engineering, which is, you know, one of the oldest sort of skill concepts in AI. And of course, the interface, there are tons of interfaces. You can just go to, you know, chatgpt.com and use it on the web, right? There's interfaces like Codex that are a desktop app that are all in one, right? You can use Claude Code from the command line. You can access AI, very, very powerful AI through Notion, you know, through their interface, right? And so there's all these challenges. And I think one of the things that I've noticed myself is that it is very, I mean, quite literally sometimes on a weekly basis, you're evaluating the cost of updating your workflow because it's not free to change the way you do things. And there's no guarantee that it's going to be better.
Right.
You know, which is really mentally exhausting, right?
It is.
It reminds me of this. We'll try to dig it up and put it in the show notes, but there was a artist who created an illustration. It was for it was a major publication, so the Atlantic or the New Yorker or something, you know, something of that nature. And there was a story about him. He was on like version 2 of Photoshop. And this is some time ago, you know, so it was on like version, let's just say 8. I don't remember the exact numbers, right? But basically, like, you know, he had to run an older computer to run it.
Okay.
Right? Because it wasn't supported on newer versions of the operating system, right? And this is a great example of, you know, sort of a craftsman who is really familiar with the tool and says, like, I'm just going to use this tool because I'm really good with it, right? And I'm not going to change what I'm doing. And, you know, he was successful enough at that, you know, to still produce cover art for a very, very reputable, like, magazine, you know? And so I've actually thought about that multiple times because it's like, well, do you just pick a tool set and workflow and model that works well for you and only very occasionally, you know, switch because the switching costs can be super high. So I think there are a ton of factors that contribute to that. But let's actually switch and speak to someone who has not experienced this burnout.
Yeah.
Dylan's a software engineer, and we've said many times on the show that just because of the nature of LLMs, working with language, and the gigantic corpus of publicly available code that all the frontier labs have scraped and processed and, you know, sort of understand, AI has been predisposed to solving more difficult problems in software engineering and writing code than in a lot of other industries at a faster rate. But it is coming with the same force to other industries. So speak to the person who hasn't experienced the burnout yet and may even be thinking, I don't know, that sounds like I'm not going to experience that.
Right. I mean, I think for knowledge work, I mean, honestly, you probably have a good perspective on this because your work kind of like goes between like the tech. than the knowledge work. But I think from my perspective, I do think it'll vary a lot per job.
Yep.
I think there's a class of jobs where the accuracy is extremely important and or maybe even regulated, like your medical professional maybe, or some profession where you're like lots of schooling and credentials, and all the outputs need to be verified and stamped like legally.
Yep.
Or maybe even like a tax accountant. Like, so I think for those, I think the burnout those positions will face will be spending all of your time doing review will be really exhausting, and you will miss the time actually like doing or preparing the work.
Because those are different mental modes, right? If you're not generating it, then you're just constantly reviewing it.
Yeah. Yeah, like my father-in-law is in commercial real estate appraiser, and for him, I was talking to him about AI a little bit, and he was just mentioning being able to use it to review things, but they have to manually review and sign off, and somebody that has the credentials to do it. But I imagine in that type of role, for example, the velocity is going to drastically increase for how many reviews one appraiser is supposed to do in a week or a month or something. And I think maintaining a high quality standard there of just doing like review constantly is going to be really hard.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, we've seen that in software engineering, right?
Yeah, with pull request and
exactly.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I've noticed, and there was actually another comment that you pointed out in this thread about expectations changing from a manager or employer standpoint. And the person said, I really don't like the perception that my boss or company has about like what should be possible now that we have AI in terms of throughput, right? Which is I'm interested in your thoughts on that, because I can see both sides, and I think there are legitimate viewpoints on both sides, right? One of them is that, yes, AI is super powerful, and so, theoretically you can, like one person, or let's say one unit of labor, if we want to be clinical, can produce, far more output, right?
Right.
And I think that's a legitimate expectation, right? The other side is that it's not that easy, as we just talked about. The tool set's changing, the models change. It's a complete, there are identity issues wrapped up in that, right? It's not just a matter of like, here's a circular saw, you can, now.
which with that, a circular saw is like a normal saw that like moves faster. Like it's so similar in the like practical of how it behaves that it's really easy to understand.
Yes.
And I think that is part of the problem is we're moving from deterministic like XYZ, you can audit exactly like what happened to the granular detail into this like we got from input to output, but the middle is like pretty mushy at times.
Yeah.
Like how did we get there? We don't know.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. So I think that this is what I would say to sort of the knowledge worker who maybe hasn't experienced burnout, or maybe that even seems unrealistic to them because they get a ton of value out of it. And I would say so first of all, it's likely going to become a problem in a bunch of other disciplines, right? So, I work on content, right? And we use AI all the time.
Right.
And it is super powerful, but it's pretty difficult to wield in a productive way. There's a steep learning curve there. And everyone on my team agrees it's helpful, but actually frustrating in all sorts of new ways that we weren't frustrated with our jobs like previously, right? And so I think the more that it actually becomes a core part of the tool set that you use for your core day-to-day work, the more you will experience this, right? The rough edges, the friction, the sort of the different type of interface where you're not as immersed in the deep problems, you're doing more review. And so the more, like, if it's not integrated into your core day-to-day, hour-by-hour work, you're probably not going to experience that as much as someone like Dylan, right?
Sure.
But if it is becoming more integrated, then it's, I would say it's absolutely something to think about, sort of this burnout and sort of the things changing, and even anticipating like, well, if there are fundamental changes in the tool set here, how is that going to make me feel about the competency that I have in doing this work a particular way that I did, before AI. And so the other thing I would say, and we've talked about this a lot on the show, but it continues to, I don't know if surprise is the right word, but the average person on a $20 plan, I don't think is wielding AI to the point, and they don't have access to enough power, or aren't, they are not consuming it at a level where they can experience the power enough to integrate it into their day-to-day workflow. Right? Yeah. Which is really interesting, right? And so it is, I'm becoming less surprised when people are like, AI is awesome because I can summarize a PowerPoint, right? And it's like, no one wants to go back to a world where you can't do that, right?
Sure.
It is amazing, right? Like, summarize this PowerPoint for me, and then I can go and look at the slides that are like really important. Yes, I want this world. This is great, right? But that is the most basic primitive use case, right? And so if that's the primary utility, I can absolutely see how people be like, yeah, I mean, why would you get burned out with this, right?
Right. Should be the opposite.
It should be the opposite, right? Which is true. And I think that's actually what's a little bit counterintuitive about sort of this like craftsmanship AI burnout conversation, right? Is that your initial experience is that burnout would diminish, right? And we're seeing the opposite, which is really interesting.
Right.
Okay. Practical advice. What should the person who's experiencing burnout do?
So I think the management, excuse me, I think the management framing is helpful. And I actually, just this past week, I thought about this management book put out by Gallup. So Gallup does like lots of like workplace polls, and they have interesting content about management. This management book came to mind, and one of the principles for the book, there's like 10, and it's essentially advice to managers of like, here's how to set your people up to be successful. One of the categories for setting your people up to be successful is, do they have the proper resources and materials to do their job? Super simple, right? And I was thinking about that. I was like, well, that's super applicable for AI. Like, so I guess the point is, because we talk about with AI, like we talk about context and we talk about tool use and this like long number of things. It's all revolving around like resources and materials. But I got there. The point of this is I got there because I was thinking about it like a manager, right? So I think there's a bunch of things framing yourself as a manager, and go read management books, honestly, because most of the concepts work. I think it's important to distinguish these aren't humans, and they do work differently than humans.
Right.
But there's a bunch of these concepts that work. And I'll do like another one is metrics, right? Like OKRs.
Yep.
Or standards or templates. I mean, templates, checklists, like templates and checklists, right?
Yeah.
Been around forever.
Yep.
But are actually immensely helpful.
Yep.
To validate like just using a checklist. Like we literally worked on this yesterday. We're having because it is a real struggle to get an entire team on the same page with like how we're going to use AI and get the entire team's quality up to like the same standard. Like struggle for me, I think struggle for a lot of people. And there's just a practical one that emerged the other day. It's like, we should have a checklist for this particular thing. And it was like 20 things long. And when humans were trying to review the AI like output, like 20 things was too much to try to remember, obviously. So that's a really practical one. Like, here's our checklist. If you're more in coding, it's evals, like, and you can do it. The AI has evaluations that you can build into your AI agents and stuff, but just practically, like, you can use a checklist with whatever AI that you use. And can be really helpful.
Yeah. when I think about management, as a manager and having had both really good and really bad managers in the
Right.
past, really good managers say the same thing over and over and over again.
Uh-huh.
And because they just return to first principles and
Right.
priorities with their team over and over
Right.
again, right? Constantly changing things. I mean, I do think that there is a lot of value as a manager in not in creating a team environment that does not reward or foster complacency.
Right.
Right. But in terms of the core values of what the team's working on and the core metrics that we're driving towards and other things like that, it requires constant repetition
Right.
and reminding. I'm like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
that is very similar to working with AI, right? Like, no, we're trying to do this thing.
Well, and just like in managing a team, when you find yourself saying it a bunch of times, like figure out how to integrate it into the work and into the workflow.
Yeah.
Because before, like imagine you were in charge of a team cleaning a restaurant kitchen, like it's like on the back of the door is this checklist, like initial the checklist before you leave. Like there's things like that.
Yeah.
That it's easy to get so sucked into the current, like everything's changing. That you can do that actually it works. It makes it better.
No, it's great. I had a couple of thoughts here as we were discussing this before we hit record. One of them is that, and we mentioned this a little bit earlier when we were talking about tools changing, but craftsmanship was never about the tools. And the way that I think about that is there are a couple specific points here. One, the old tools are still available. So if you like using them, you can still use them.
Yeah.
Right?
Good point.
I mean,
Yeah.
you can go write code by hand. You can go generate a marketing campaign on a
By
blank
clicking.
page.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can use your mouse still.
You can
like,
use, yeah.
Yeah.
You feel free to touch your trackpad. You can still do those things. And so I do think that there can be over rotation on, lamenting that the old days are gone, right?
Right.
But you can still do it. And I would actually even go a step further and say that intentionally doing things the old way actually is very healthy, right? To keep yourself sharp. We've talked about this on the show multiple times before. But I think it's a balance of accepting that there is a new tool that is going to be ubiquitous. In some professions, it already is completely ubiquitous in the way that the job is done, right?
Right.
Ubiquitous is a tool that everyone uses to perform their job, right? And that's spreading to more and more professions. But you can still work on your craft, right? And I think I'm seeing more and more that people who still choose to work on their craft the old way actually become better and better at using AI and can find more joy in it. So that's one thing, is that it was never about the tools, and it's not like the old tools have been taken away. And I think that that's a really important thing for us to remember. The other thought that I had was around the invention of new types of work.
Yeah.
And so it's very easy for us. We like to distill reality, right? So we distill reality into like a map.
Are you saying the map is not the territory?
Map is not the territory. We distill reality down into a format that's easy for us to consume and make sense of, right?
Yeah.
But we lose fidelity as that happens, right?
Right.
And so I think as we consider, when we struggle with this, to actually be even more precise, when we struggle with this new world of AI, or the fact that our job is changing, or, are losing some of our identity because we were really good at this certain thing with these certain tools, and now all of that has changed, it's really easy to forget that we are, like, new ways of doing things are already being created, right?
Yeah.
Software development is changing as a profession. And so the definition of what it means to be a software developer is changing, right? It's not that the old way of doing things completely goes away and that skill set's not valuable and all those sorts of things, right? But I think there's a lot of excitement in saying that, well, actually, like this entire new category of jobs is being invented, right?
Yeah.
And that, I think that's a very exciting thing. If we go back to the circular saw example, right? It sort of it's an open-ended, very future-looking question about, okay, like it used to take you, let's just say, 6 months to build this structure, right?
Yep.
What if you could build it in 3 months, right? Would you build more of them? Would you think about new types of structures to build, right? New materials come out, right? And so there's an immense amount of opportunity there. And I think that what I would, like a very practical thing, like mindset that I would encourage people to adopt is that there is a craftsmanship in learning what that new job is and how to do it, right? Which is, that's a challenge, right? Because of all the tools and all the change, especially the rate of change in AI.
Right.
But I think that I would adopt a less binary mindset of like, I don't know if I like this new world, right? The exciting thing is I actually have agency to shape what the new role looks like,
Right.
and sort of even define the way that I do things and define what it means to be a craftsman, in this new world.
I think one last thing that there's come up a lot, especially when I talk to leaders or executives. I think this may be a little bit less true of an engineer or individual contributor, but especially when I talk to leaders and executives, most of them, when they're honest, they're like, there's probably 2 or 3 decisions I make a year that make the biggest impact. And like most of the decisions we make are pretty much inconsequential. So I mean that in a encouraging way.
Okay. Explain that.
Like, because it's only like a couple of things. Like one, we're like, oh, I hope I don't miss them, right?
Yeah.
Which is
Sure.
fair.
Yeah.
But the other piece of it is, in some ways, it should take a little bit of the pressure off, as far as zooming out a bit. And I think we're so focused on output, speed, maybe even efficiency with our new tooling, to realize that, like, I don't think the math changed there.
Yes.
Pre-AI, it was like just a couple of like key decisions that got us, like, post-AI. I think that math is the same. And therefore you have the capability of being like 5x, 10x, whatever x more productive. But I don't know that, like, at the highest level of reality, that the math changed there. As far as, like, we can actually still only do 2 or 3 things really well, or only have 2 or 3 really high impact things that we do. And that maybe that changes. I don't know. But at least from talking to people, I haven't gotten the sense that has fundamentally changed.
I completely agree with that. The ability to contextualize, this is going to sound very AI, but as a human, take in a bunch of disparate information, contextualize it, and make a really good strategic decision is huge. And I completely agree with that. And I think that AI can, help gather information as part of that process. But I think you're right. Retaining your ability to do that is critical, and I don't think that math has changed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on the Token Intelligence Show, and we will catch you on the next one.